Welcome to ILTV on the Hour. We're live from Israel with your top headlines from across the region. It's 7 a.m. in New York and 2 p.m. here in Israel. I'm Sivan Raviv, and these are the latest developments coming to you live from Israel. After 11 years, one of Israel's most painful wounds has finally found closure. The remains of Lieutenant Hadar Goldin, kidnapped into Gaza in 2014, were returned after 4,118 days. But new revelations show U.S. negotiators had proposed safe passage for Hamas terrorists as part of the arrangement, a concession Israel says it won't accept. According to sources involved in negotiations, the United States has offered Hamas safe passage for about 200 terrorists still trapped in Rafah in exchange for Hadar Goldin's remains. However, the body was returned before the deal took effect, after Hamas learned that Israeli forces had already discovered the tunnel where Goldin's body was being held. U.S. officials are now reportedly pressuring Israel to allow those terrorists safe exit from Rafah as part of ongoing ceasefire talks, a move that Israel opposes. U.S. officials are now pressuring Israel to show flexibility regarding the numerous terrorists trapped in those tunnels, with senior Israeli officials saying that if American pressure intensifies, Israel may have no choice but to compromise. Meanwhile, the Goldin family spoke out last night after finally receiving Hadar's remains, saying the moment brought closure after 11 long years of agony. Let's take a listen.
לפני 11 שנים ו3 חודשים עמדנו פה בחודש אוגוסט אחרי שחטפו לנו את הדר וצעקנו שאסור לעזוב את עזה בלי להשיב את הדר. והיה לנו מובן מאליו שמדינת ישראל לא תשאיר חיילים מאחור. לקח לנו 11 שנים להחזיר אותו בעזרת צה"ל וכוחות הביטחון.
At the same time, Turkey is pressing for a role in any future multinational force governing Gaza, a move Israel is publicly rejecting. Israel is making clear there will be no Turkish troops in Gaza, and that position will shape how Phase 2 of governance moves forward. Let's take a listen to the government spokesperson on this.
There will be no Turkish boots on the ground in the present, in the past, in the future, specifically in the International Stabilization Force.
As Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman prepares to visit the White House, Riyadh is making its position clear. No normalization with Israel without a roadmap to Palestinian statehood. Despite President Trump's optimism about a new Abraham Accords breakthrough, Saudi officials said that the kingdom will not sign any agreement until it sees credible progress toward a sovereign Palestinian state. Analysts say the Crown Prince intends to press Trump for a clear American commitment to that goal during his meeting on November 18th. Formal ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia would mark a historic shift in regional alliances, but for now, the kingdom is signaling it's going to wait. Israeli and Western officials warned that Iran is preparing for a new round of conflict with Israel even after the devastating war in June. It's being reported that Tehran's missile factories are operating 24 hours a day, and intelligence indicates Iran now has enough enriched uranium to build more than 11 nuclear bombs. Israel believes Iran has moved much of its uranium stockpile to a secret site nicknamed Pickaxe Mountain. Ali Weiss of the International Crisis Group warned that in any future war, Iran aims to launch 2,000 missiles at once to overwhelm Israeli defenses, far more than the 500 total missiles fired during the June conflict. Israeli officials called the last confrontation an unfinished job and said they are preparing for another war, which they see as only a matter of time. And now, joining us to discuss all of these issues is Lily. Lily, are you joining us from Paris? Lily Moo, an Iranian activist and human rights activist. Thank you for joining.
For the moving background, because unfortunately
Lily, we are hearing you on air right now. We are live, and I wanted to ask you about these latest news coming out. According to a New York Times report, the next war between Israel and Iran is inevitable. Do you believe, As someone who knows Iran well, do you believe that to be the case? Is that a realistic forecast, do you think?
I do believe it is a realistic forecast because the Ayatollahs have constantly been shamed. And what the Islamic regime in Iran tends to do is every time it is put to shame, they try to retaliate. And they retaliate either through hurting Iranian people or by causing a lot of noise in the international community. And also, every time they feel defenseless, they take drastic acts against the international community, as we have seen in the diplomatic scenes and the embassy of Israel in Mexico, for example. The Islamic regime in Iran is at its feet, and even if it is trying to rebuild ammunition and use rebuild artilleries after the attack it has endured, it is still not over the fantasy that they are going to attack and take over Israel. But it's an empty drum, literally an empty drum, just a very loud noise. And that's what the mullahs are.
Now, inside Iran's leadership, which you mentioned, there appear to be two camps, one who may be pushing for negotiation, one preparing for direct war. Which side is gaining ground? What do you think the regime is after?
Considering the amount of sanctions the Islamic regime is under at the moment after the emergence of President Donald Trump and after the suffering they've endured over the 12-day war, the hardcore extremists would be pushing for war, but the ones who think they can still fight with tooth, heart, and nail to keep this regime and stay afloat in Iran, just to keep at least the people under the illusion that this regime might just stay a bit longer. So they're using all kinds of negotiations to say this is not going to go forward. You all know that the last word is the word of the Ayatollah, and what he says goes. And he's calling for war, therefore war will happen. As we have seen over the past 2 years, time and time again, unwarranted missiles coming from the sovereign country of Iran into sovereign country of Israel at the hands of the mullahs. This is not a war Iranian people want. This is not a war Israel deserves to have, and it needs to be ended. It has to be an end.
So you mentioned the people of Iran. Let's talk about them. What's happening inside Iran right now? What are the voices on the streets saying in regards to this?
Iranian people are asking for regime change. They are not interested in another war. But what they are also seeing is that every time Israel has aided, has aided them in standing against this regime, as we have witnessed over the past 2 years since the October 7 massacres, since the April 14th attacks from Iran into Israel, Israel's retaliation has given a strength and a point of hope to Iranian people that maybe this regime, after all of the atrocities that they have pulled on Iranian people, after the 45-year silence of the international community, at least Israel, in defense of itself, is defending Iranian people. And Iranian people do not want to have a war against Israel, but the Islamic regime has brought a war into our country. It has put Iranian people in danger. And unlike Israel, who is adamant on defending its people and is putting the infrastructure there for its people during a time of war, Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic's regime, is hoping to use Iranian civilians as its own shields just to make Israel look bad. However, we have seen over the past multiple attacks on the Islamic regime, the target for the Israelis have always been the regime allies, members, or the nuclear facilities or IRGC, not the Iranian civilians. Even if the civilians are being put at risk at the hands of the regime, the Israelis have proven to be on the side of Iranian people so far.
Now, there's constant discussion about Iran's nuclear program. How accurate would you say is the claim that President Trump's military actions severely degraded it? President Trump says they obliterated it. What do people think in Iran? Do you think...
Scientifically speaking, because of the radius around the country, we know that it was not the actual nuclear material that was touched, which is a great thing for our planet and for the country we run and the country surrounding. However, the nuclear facilities have been obliterated. Whether the material in that facility was there or moved, we don't know. That's all. That I don't want to get into any conspiracies, but I do know that these have been damaged and the Islamic regime is suffering. But one thing that the Islamic regime does a lot of is lie on steroids.
So you believe that
lie.
You believe this may be a lie, that they say that they still have capabilities?
I mean, I don't doubt that I don't think they have enough capabilities to cause damage to outside of Iran, let's say that. And this regime is not impartial when it comes to wanting to cause damage to Iranians, as we saw with the flights, the Ukrainian flight 575, I believe, or 573, where the IRGC shot military missiles at a passenger flight after the death of Qasem Soleimani. So in retaliation to their failures, who knows what this regime is capable of when it comes to hurting Iranian people and Iranian infrastructure.
Now, how do you believe that the US and Western allies, how should they respond to Iran, in your opinion? What should they be doing?
Honestly, I think considering the attack on the embassy in Mexico, or the attempt on the attack for the Israeli embassy in Mexico, is enough to call in all of the ambassadors from the free world where Iran has embassies and call in and start having discussions. Also, we need to acknowledge the fact that this regime is a war criminal regime who doesn't care about international law or due process. What they do is what they want. We just have to be alert, and we have to be on guard, and we have to be prepared to protect ourselves and our nations. And I say this as an Iranian Westerner who knows the truth about this regime. All they do is put out threats, and we saw what happened in Aston Villa in Birmingham just a few days ago. The attacks of the Islamic regime is not just through military, it's also through social behavior. And this regime is happy and adamant that they have enough support in the sort of the minds of the everyday Westerner that they can pull off by saying such heavy statements. And that is enough to cause and incite fear in the Western countries and therefore into the hearts of their governments. But it's not enough. Empty words. The Islamic Republic has had empty word after empty word for 46 years. And the consequences of those words have meant complete isolation of Iranian people from the international community and atrocities on them. And then we saw the October 7th atrocities unfold, and the proxy war that has rolled for over the past 3 years in the Middle East. I mean, there has to be an end to this soon. And the end of that would be with the end of the Ayatollah's regime. No other way out of it.
Now, we're currently catching you at a conference in Paris. Tell me about this conference.
So we have come together as a coalition of global women against use of rape as a weapon of war, as we have witnessed the atrocities of Hamas over the October 7th massacres and the silence that fell on all of our ears through the international community and the international women's spaces. This is the second summit held and led by ELNET and a lot of incredible women from, I think, 21 women in the summer of 2024. We got together and came to the Knesset, and we also went to the places where atrocities had taken place. And these atrocities are true, they are factual, they have happened, and we are here to confirm that, raise awareness, and try and find a way to legally stop Not that we can legally stop a crime from happening in such atrocious ways, but the accountability that follows through is what is important, and also supporting the victims, being the voice for the victims. So many of these, so many of the victims are no longer alive, but the pattern of the atrocity is very much there and is testament to the truth of the atrocities and the murder that took place against those young and innocent women in the Nova Festival, or in the kibbutzim, or in Sudan, or in Iran, in the prisons where women are getting tortured to death. Literally, I mean, Iranian women are getting raped to death just as because their crime is a virgin, while they are prisoners of thought right before being hung in the morning. This is the crimes of the Islamic Republic. This is the crime of unspeakable atrocities that our world should not be having to bear. But here we are, and hopefully tomorrow would be a brighter day for all of us.
Now, you speak about the struggles of Iranian women. What can you tell me about this from a personal perspective?
I mean, during the Mahsa Amini uprising, when hundreds and thousands of Iranian men and women came to the streets of Iran to call out for justice and to call out the atrocities of this regime and to call out regime change, what the regime did in retaliation and response to the voice of truth and voice of justice was rape, torture, and murder. I also want to let you know that it is good to remember we are in November. We are in the anniversary of Bloody November, where more than 3,000 Iranian men, women, and children were raped, mutilated, and murdered in the streets of Iran at the hands of this regime in a 3-day period, just over an uprising, the Aban Khunin, that is what we call it in Iran, the Bloody November, where they killed and they threw the dead bodies in the gutter. The very same thing happened in Israel in October 7th. The exact same behavior. That atrocity, that brutality has to be stopped. Those who take part in such atrocities and those who appease it have to be held accountable. And that is why we are here today.
Iranian activist Lily Moo, thank you very much for joining us, for your voice, for speaking up, and for sharing this input.
Thank you for having me today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And now moving on to a shakeup at the BBC. Two of the most senior figures at Britain's public broadcaster, Director General Tim Davie and the head of BBC News, Deborah Turnis, have resigned following accusations of political bias and editorial manipulation. The controversy centers on allegations that the BBC edited a speech by President Trump in a way that made it appear he was encouraging the January 6th Capitol riot, as well as criticism of the network coverage of the Gaza war, of Israel's war with Hamas, minimizing Israeli suffering. We're now joined by Simon Plosker, Editorial Director at HonestReporting. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So an internal standards advisor's report was leaked suggesting systemic failures in coverage, not just of Trump, but also of the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. What do we learn about the BBC's editorial culture here?
Well, I think what we've learned is that there's a serious problem within the BBC, and I don't think that these two resignations, we can look at it as some sort of victory for someone like me. I must say, last night I was watching the TV, I was seeing the coverage, and it's huge in the UK because the BBC is the public broadcaster. It is funded by the license fee payer, by British tax money, basically. So this is front page news, but is this going to be the start of a change? I'm not so sure, because I think what we have learned over the years, and I've been watching the BBC now for over 20 years as a media monitor for HonestReporting, but also further back, as you can tell from my accent, I'm originally British. I grew up with the BBC. So we've seen plenty, but unfortunately, the issue really is that so many of the people inside the BBC have been captured by groupthink. They come from one particular political angle, which is left liberal. And when it comes to Israel, for example, we've seen over the years, and certainly within the last 2 years during this terrible war, the coverage from the BBC has been amongst some of the worst in the Western world. And I say the Western world because the BBC is important precisely because it has a global reach far beyond the shores of Britain itself.
Now, let's talk specifically about the Gaza coverage. Jewish and Israeli critics have long argued that the BBC applies double standards in reporting on Israel. Does this controversy strengthen that case? What are some examples we saw during the war that you can mention here?
So I think one of the examples that really springs to mind comes from near the beginning of the war. We had the Al-Ahli hospital incident. If viewers will remember, a rocket supposedly hit the hospital, and the headlines blared that 500 people were dead. The hospital had been half wrecked, and then very, very quickly, in fact, we discovered that it was, in fact, an Islamic Jihad rocket, a misfired rocket that landed in the car park. And there were far, far fewer people killed and injured in that particular incident. But the BBC, one can remember, one of their correspondents, John Donaldson, was live on air and asked about this. And he said that it couldn't possibly be anything else other than an Israeli missile, an airstrike. And of course, he was proven wrong. And this was just the start of a number of terrible pieces of coverage. One can also mention that BBC has an Arabic station as well, where dozens of their journalists, so-called journalists, have been exposed for supporting the October 7th massacre, even going as far as support for Adolf Hitler. So there have been various corrections on that particular station as well. Mm-hmm. And it's been one thing after another. And even just a couple of months ago, one can remember as well, the Glastonbury Music Festival in the UK, where a punk band, Bob Vylan, was being screened live by the BBC and went on air shouting death, death to the IDF. And that was just after their lead singer had gone on an anti-Semitic rant against his former employer. So all these things have kind of added up now to a critical mass, and now we're seeing the results.
Now, here in Israel, I must say it's no news to us that the BBC covers Israel and the war impartially. There have even been sarcastic skits about this in popular Israeli entertainment shows. But it is far from being funny. It has had severe damage on public opinion. Can you elaborate on how these biases shaped public opinion when it comes to Israel?
Well, I think it's not necessarily the damage. I mean, it does do a lot of damage to Israel. And obviously, we are fighting on a multiple front war here. And one of those fronts is the media war. And the BBC has a very, very large influence on that. But I think certainly one of the biggest problems we've seen is not necessarily for Israel itself, but for diaspora Jewish communities, particularly the British Jewish community. And the rise in anti-Semitism, many people there are attributing to the coverage that we've seen in the British media, and particularly on the BBC. My own sister actually works for the Community Security Trust in the UK, which deals with obviously the security of the British Jewish community. And they've been witnessing terrible spikes in anti-Semitic incidents. And of course, that can also be seen in the horrific incidents in Manchester just a few weeks ago, which led to the death of 3 people at a synagogue on Yom Kippur. So what the BBC does has real world impact, not just on Israel, but also on Jewish communities around the world.
Absolutely. And this isn't the first time an internal report has dealt with BBC Israel coverage, is it?
That is correct. We have to go rewind the clock a long time, because back in 2004, an internal report was commissioned, and someone called Malcolm Balin released this report. It was an internal report. We never, ever saw what was in it. However, there was a reason for that. One can speculate that had the report cleared the BBC of any bias, it would have been out there in the public. But the BBC actually spent thousands and thousands of pounds of license fee payers' money attempting to keep this from going public. And they managed to succeed. And we don't know what's in that report, but one can probably guess that it was not very rosy for the BBC at all in terms of its coverage of Israel and the Middle East. Quite frankly, now it's been a long time since this report was written. I don't believe there's any point now in trying to get it released. It may just prove what we knew over many, many years. But now, of course, we've reached this stage where more current reporting has led to this particular moment.
And it took the Trump affair in order to finally push the BBC over the cliff.
It did. And, you know, this actually is quite disturbing to me because we have to ask this question. How is it that after months and months, in fact, you know, at least 2 years worth of abysmal coverage and moments where the BBC has been called out and embarrassed for its coverage of the Gaza war, why is it that no one took that seriously enough to push the BBC over the edge? And why is it that only now, when this particular incident regarding the editing of a Donald Trump speech for a current affairs program, how is it that that is the thing that actually worked the magic here? In my mind, this is just another example of how Jews and Israel simply don't count. We've been gaslit over the BBC for a long time now. Those of us who've spent far too long sending in complaints, official complaints via the BBC's complaints department, will know what happens. If you get an email response, it comes back weeks or months later, and it is always incredibly defensive. The BBC will never ever admit wrongdoing. They will do what they can to avoid owning up to any problems. And in this particular case now, the only reason they've owned up to anything is because an internal memo was leaked to the British media, in this particular case, the Daily Telegraph. And that has caused a critical mass here.
And you believe that these resignations are certainly not enough?
They're definitely not enough. There are people inside the BBC who we have been watching and monitoring for years, including their international editor, Jeremy Bowen, who has a long track record of anti-Israel bias. And these people are still in place. We don't know who is going to be replacing Deborah Turness as the CEO of the news department, but whoever it is going to have to clean house before we can have any sort of confidence that the coverage from the BBC is going to be anything other than horrendously biased and anti-Israel.
I understand. Well, thank you very much for this really important input. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
That's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour, broadcasting live from Israel and the heart of the Middle East. We're here every hour on the hour with the latest breaking developments, in-depth reports, and exclusive insights into the stories shaping the region and the world. Stay with us throughout the day for our next edition of ILTV on the Hour. We'll be here as events continue to unfold. Scan the QR code for our apps. Until then, I'm Sivan Raviv. Thank you very much for watching and stay safe.